Welcome and good morning. I'm Lori McNeil, and I'm presenting today. You've signed up for this session on academic integrity and EDI, or as I like to call it, since I like acronyms, AI plus EDI. So welcome and thank you very much for coming. I'm presenting today from my home in Vancouver, which is on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. If you're joining us from elsewhere, I would welcome you to post your own acknowledgement in the chat. And as I make that acknowledgement, I'm recognizing that I'm a settler on stolen land, and I commit to the ongoing and urgent work of acknowledging and addressing systemic inequities that higher education as a colonial institution too often easily and unquestioningly reproduces. For me as a faculty member, teaching and learning with integrity includes the challenging and ongoing work of thinking and learning about how education has been exclusive and inaccessible and how it has done harm. Integrity here requires us to recognize our own privilege and our power as agents in the system and the power that we therefore have to intervene. And it's that place of thinking about the power to make interventions that's I'll be using to think about the kinds of reframing we can do as members of the institution to connect academic integrity and equity, diversity, and inclusion. Just to give you an overview of what we'll be doing today, I'm going to open with some myths, and we'll do some myth busting before concluding by thinking about how we can connect those we can move forward with a culture of integrity. I'm going to pause mid-session for a check-in and questions or comments. I'll be looking in the chat, and then we'll have a longer Q&A session at the end. The session, as you've heard, is being recorded. I have a resources and reference doc that Suki is going to pop in the chat that you can take away, and the slides will be shared as well. Okay, let's get going. I wanted to explain how I came to this intersection of equity, diversity, inclusion, and academic integrity. And that arises from a project I ran at UBC in the Faculty of Arts first-year programs that I did with a number of faculty members and with the support of TLEF funding. It was called the Cheating Hearts project. And it was a project that developed, implemented, and assessed explicit and enhanced academic integrity instruction and writing courses through what is known as an educative approach rather than a disciplinary or punitive one. This project has generated a number of resources, including a website with instructional materials, and I've just published a book chapter in the fabulous collection Academic Integrity in Canada. That's an open access book. It's an open access book chapter that discusses the findings of the Cheating Hearts project, and that information again is in the handout I've just circulated that Suki's dropped in the chat. So that project arose because I had been a faculty member for a number of years, but I'd also was in an administrative role. I was the director of first-year programs, and being in those two different roles at the same time, including a role in which I was meeting with students in misconduct settings, led to some really transformative insights for me about how we as an institution were doing some things less effectively and in fact harmfully. So I wanted to move from a default model of distrust, suspicion, and moral outrage that is often the terrain in which we find ourselves in an academic misconduct setting, to realizing that academic misconduct is an educational problem, and that's an opportunity. We could invite our students to take up academic integrity while we're asking them to join us in the academic community, and we could give them a better rationale than don't get caught, while providing them with the skills and confidence they need to meet those expectations. So that led the group of faculty members we were working with, many of whom presented yesterday in the session on academic integrity, to think about what we could do differently. This was about a project that was really interested in shifting our support, as Cheryl Keir has written, from blaming students for what we're not teaching them, and also working against the dominant attitudes that students commit misconduct from a willfulness or dishonesty more often than ignorance. And that certainly was a big unlearning or a relearning work for us in that program. This is also a way of modeling an ethical pedagogy that addresses the needs of diverse student body. And that last point, thinking about an ethical pedagogy, a pedagogy of integrity, has been a real major takeaway for me from the Cheating Hearts project, and ones that I've continued to develop. And to think about how academic integrity, or more accurately, academic misconduct, intersects quite critically with these issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion, because academic integrity too often plays a gatekeeping role in the academy. Debates about and approaches to this topic are often replete with coded terms, and they replay unchecked and problematic assumptions. This happens for a number of reasons, but I think a major one is that how and why to teach academic integrity is just not something many of us have thought about up until this point, or really have been trained to think about it. If I reflect on my own disciplinary training in English literature, we never talked about those aspects, and we tend to reproduce what we have learned. But we're all here together today to think, and you've been doing your own thinking as well, and that's an opportunity for us to do some of that work together. So I'm going to begin with some of the dominant ideas about academic integrity, or more accurately, misconduct, and then respond to those ideas, stereotypes, and myths with what the research in academic integrity studies and higher education actually shows us. And this is the importance of bringing an evidence-based rather than an anecdotal and often hysterical lens to this topic. I've begun with this comic. Comics are very good to the academic integrity researcher, because there's a lot of comics about plagiarism and cheating. And this one with these two men in a prison cell, one of them in there for grand theft auto and the other because they've committed plagiarism, really for me encapsulates the first myth, that academic misconduct is a moral failing, a major crime, and that approach to it that requires a substantial, significant punishment. And that's a kind of crime punishment model that seems like a fair and equitable approach. Of course, that's the default framework, the one that's most often used by university policies, and one that we see circulating in department instructor syllabus language, often because we've just stopped looking at those. And we also see that often in the news as well. There's a scandal or a moral panic, as I like to call it, about cheating and its endemic qualities. We talk about this as the quasi-judicial and or moralizing framework, and this is one that assumes students will commit misconduct and that they'll do so with malicious intent. Certainly it is true that some students will and do commit misconduct, and that they will do that with malicious intent. But many students who do end up in misconduct situations got there for other reasons, and we'll talk about that more later on. But the language they face from us as an institution is scary and intimidating. It's a scared straight approach, like the one that we've seen in the war on drugs, which we know hasn't worked very well either. So thinking about some of the research here, let's see if I can make my slides work. Yes, I can. This is what Penaluna and Ross talk about is the morality and rule compliance. So thinking about how that creates a binary between just people who are morally following the rules versus those who are not. So we can think about other binaries that are created by this insider, outsider, cheater, good person binary that's so dominant. And if we think about the moral positioning that's inherent in that language, as Mulholland's looked at in policy documents in higher education that often use language like someone being dishonest or unethical, the messaging is not that you don't know how to do something or that you did something badly, like you cited badly, but that you are a cheater, you are a bad person, which is really loaded language that's also harmful. This is the identity that we are thrusting on students in these cases of cheater is an identity that can be demoralizing, it's alienating, it's isolating, and it's shaming. This is the blame and shame model that Cheryl Keir discusses. And it doesn't come with any real understanding of why some of those students might end up in a misconduct setting. For example, because they came up through different knowledge-making systems, or possibly we didn't explicitly say, this is how we do things here in this institution or in this assignment. And it takes time to shake off years of entrenched practice in other methods that they may have come through from K-12 or other educational settings. Because this does harm, I'd really love for us to root out this moralizing language, both in policy and in our own classrooms, and to think about moving from that place of moral judgment to thinking about that educative practice. In the Cheating Hearts Project, we deliberately use the language of academic integrity when possible, because that's an aspirational quality. It's the thing we were inviting our students to take up as part of the identity and practices of this research community, the things that we were looking for. And that was a way to foster uptake and belonging in the academic community. Maybe you'll also see this in the new UBC Academic Integrity website, which I've linked in the resources handout. And there's also efforts underway to update UBC policy language, which, as Mary Davis has argued, is an important aspect, not only to move away from that cheating, not cheating binary, but also to make those documents understandable by students that maybe have the lawyers back off a little bit on the language front so that students can actually understand what we mean in these documents. And also to think about, as UBC and other institutions are, to looking at other models for dealing with misconduct situations. Okay, next myth. In this comic where someone, a child feels that their brother is copying them because they have both written the common knowledge, the first 3 letters of the alphabet. This ties to me into the idea that everyone already knows what academic integrity means and how to meet those expectations. Or so we don't need to teach it, or someone else is going to or has already taught them. But what does the research show us actually? Students do not come into our classrooms, whether in first year, fourth year, or grad school, with the same or a sophisticated understanding of academic integrity and how to meet those expectations. Often their knowledge is focused on the mechanistic aspects, like how to actually format a citation, and they don't have any rationale for why you would care beyond where to put the period in your footnote or bibliography, these kinds of things. Peters and Kajou have done a study in 2019 that really puts a finger on the problem. There is a massive gap. Students think that we're going to teach them how to use these skills, to apply these skills, but faculty think they already know. That means that there is a big gap that is harmful. So if we're thinking about a gap, students expecting for us to teach them, we're not assuming that we have to, because they already know, whether they've learned it in high school or first year English or maybe in a module. That's harmful for a number of reasons. One is that we are not providing them with the knowledge they need, which means we are suggesting that everybody already knows that. So if you don't know that, you don't belong. You're already sort of internalizing this sense that you're an outsider, not smart enough, not good enough. So if you are in that situation and you feel like you can't ask a question and you don't have the knowledge you need and you make a mistake and then you get caught, then you become a cheater. And we see how that just perpetuates those kinds of harms. But we're also, by not acknowledging the need to teach these skills, provide that kind of contextual understanding in all of our courses, we're also suggesting inaccurately that learning about academic integrity is a one-off, something you could do in high school once, first year writing course once, in a library module once. And that denies the complexity, the nuance, and the discipline-specific applications that, in fact, attach to academic integrity. That attitude also reinforces for academic integrity that, for students, that academic integrity is a set of rules that's both kind of easy and inconsequential, unless you get caught, as well as, again, the fact that they should already know this. Another result of or harm that can be done is if we aren't helping our students, predatory companies are. And this is the big problem of contract cheating sites, homework help sites like Chegg and Course Hero that seem to step in to support students because we're not providing that help. Okay, next myth. Particular groups of students are more likely to engage in misconduct. I'm just going to give you a second to think about what particular groups you think or you hear about as being more likely to commit misconduct. You can put a guess in the chat if you wish. Judy says, asked a clarification, more likely to engage and more likely to be caught. Judy, you are getting ahead of the class because that is in fact, we'll take both answers. So 3 people said international students, Vincent said students of color. Yes, okay. So these are the more likely, but the question actually to go to Judy's point was the moral panic is about who are the cheaters, but Judy's put a finger on it. Research in academic integrity studies in higher education, looking at rates of cheating, self-reported, doing sort of anonymous surveys of students, focus group, etc., looking at actual rates of misconduct reports by instructors, things like gender, race, religion, first and family, etc., do not necessarily show those demographics of students as having higher rates of committing misconduct, but there is a massive difference in who gets reported, with international students being the ones who are most overrepresented, even though rates of actual misconduct committed are about the same as with domestic students. Within groups of, and this was actually true for another factor that Sarah Eaton has looked at, men are more likely than women to be reported. And in particular, the least likely group to be reported are, as, and this is directly from Eaton, white women, native English speakers. She calls this the angel effect, which is a provocative way for us to think about who is not getting reported and why they are not getting reported. Of course, we understand this as reflecting implicit bias. We can think about the ongoing discussions, debates, provocations around online proctoring systems like Proctorio. There was actually an article out just this past weekend about an online proctoring platform that flagged a student of color because it was algorithmically finding her behavior abnormal. So what are they looking for? What is seen as normal? What is even seen? So thinking about these groups, we can think about how harmful it is when certain groups are more often reported. The studies have shown that once international students are identified, they are more likely to be to drop out or be expelled. Mary Davis has pointed out that misconduct referrals for students who are new to the university have the result of alienating students new to the university by making them feel like outsiders. They will disengage. They often don't go on to finish. A few reminders here, as Tracy Breytag reminds us that diversity means more than international students. So we've talked a little bit about gender as one aspect. Sarah Eden is undertaking work to look at disabilities as another aspect, which is something that the Proctorio debates have raised, thinking about the ableist and normative assumptions there. But we have a real disconnect, again, between assumptions possibly built in to our platforms, policies, and practices that are looking for or assuming some kinds of students to be distrustworthy versus others. And that's definitely something that we want to be sounding the alarm about. Okay, I think this is my final myth, and this is about the word rigor, because we often see hysteria, again, about if we change our practices, if we have an open book exam, if we have a take-home exam, or we don't have an exam at all, we will compromise the rigor of our courses. I always want to know, what does rigor mean? Rigor often seems to be a coded term, a code for something else, something that's sequestered. If it means in the context of academic integrity is to police against cheating, then I think that's a pretty poor metric for learning, for assessing learning. And we can do better. And we can think about other ways to be inviting and assessing knowledge making in our courses. Before I move on, I just want to check the chat and see if there's anything happening. I see lots of more votes for who is getting caught. Oh, Michelle is, no, I'm not sure which myth Michelle is referred to, but certainly these are the myths that our students are hearing about too. So you can think about how, if we as instructors are internalizing these myths, we are reproducing them for our students, who are then hearing them and thinking about what the implications of us reproducing those myths might be. I agree, Jackie, that rigor in research is indeed very important, but we want to think about rigor as opposed to rigidity. How about that? Or thinking about how we're using that term. Okay, we have busted some myths, and we are thinking about how to improve academic integrity, and we want to do so in ways that will recognize the intersections with equity, diversity, and inclusion. So what can we do? I'd like to propose some questions for us to be taking away from the session and thinking about as we think about how to build a culture of integrity that upholds a responsibility to think about equity, diversity, and inclusion, accessibility. So one is, what would it look like if we began from a place of trust and thought about the job we have to do to help students do work with integrity in this space? And also to be thinking about what that changes when we begin from a position of trust. Thinking about an assessment piece, how could we invite students to participate in knowledge making in ways that are rigorous, but that also invite genuine, informed, and ethical participation? And that we also have to think about our scalable work in the kinds of courses we're teaching with the kinds of students we have. But again, thinking about assessment that works from an opening premise of trust. I would encourage some reflection about our part as members of this institution, but thinking about the institution as creating and reproducing systemic inequities, and thinking also about bringing everybody on board and supporting them. This is a universal design for learning approach. It's student-centered. This is about also listening to students, listening and learning from our students. As Tricia Bertram-Gallant points out, when we move to a teaching and learning focus, this allows for an understanding of students as learners who are grappling with new ways of knowing and presenting knowledge, and thereby that presents greater opportunities to engage students in discussions about academic integrity in all its complexities. So this is a way for us to think about how to build and develop an academic and culture of integrity that's informed by EDI. This is also a way for us to think about shifting the labor of a misconduct process. We can kind of preload that by spending the time instead and building the culture of integrity. We heard a little bit about this in yesterday's terrific session on how, when, and why we do academic integrity. Michelle's just asked, EDI is equity, diversity, and inclusion. Thanks, Michelle. I appreciate the chance to re-explain that. Okay. I want to pull this together, and we sort of presented the opposite of all of these planks to think about building that culture of integrity. Let's begin with the premises that students don't know what we mean or why we care. They end up in misconduct situations through a number of reasons. Some of those reasons are academic, some of them are not, but misconduct is not inevitable. So again, we be open by trusting our students. We can reduce its occurrence. And it's something that we can teach and that we should be teaching. This means we have, if we think about these planks, we have the opportunity to address a problem, maybe run one off by giving ourselves and our students the knowledge of what our expectations are and how to meet them and why they should and why we should too. And that's something I'll talk about in a moment. As an institution and as individual educators, we have an opportunity and we have a responsibility to help students do their work in this way. We can reward integrity. This is that shift from or to, I should say, to a position of trust to think about how students come to us, the different experiences they bring, the different experiences they're working through, in addition to being in our courses, their life circumstances. What I call a pedagogy of integrity is embodied in that position of curiosity and humility that we bring to this topic, and that recognizing and teaching and learning with integrity is an ongoing and responsive process, one in which we need to listen to our students. And I do want to pause here, and I often want to emphasize that I'm not suggesting that we will eradicate cheating. That's not a realistic goal. But we certainly can reduce accidental cases, which are really devastating, the most devastating perhaps for students and faculty. And we can invite other students to make different choices by helping them become invested in this way of thinking, and by changing the culture in which the normal is academic integrity versus a normal of academic misconduct. Okay, so we've got the planks. Let's think about the different elements of a culture of integrity. And I've talked about all these pieces, so I'm bringing them together here, thinking about the importance of establishing, let's see if I can get my pointer to work. Oh, I can. Laser pointer. Let's do that. The idea that we are moving to an educative model versus a punitive model, or as Sarah Eaton calls it, a proactive rather than a punitive approach. And I love that language of proactive versus reactive kind of framework, because that gives us some agency, some opportunity, some power to think about, we can get ahead of this and do something differently. We've talked about ways that we can reward integrity, changing to teaching skills and giving practices and how to reach them, thinking about savvy assessment design, course design, always through a lens of recognizing the ways that we are butting up against, intersecting with issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion, making sure that we're being really clear about expectations, and I'll say more about that in a moment, and that we are upholding those expectations ourselves. And those expectations are about the expectations of the university around academic integrity. And that is in our own scholarship, that's in the practices of our own teaching, and also in how we respond when we have misconduct cases or cases that are of suspected misconduct. And just to return to thinking about this combination of factors, some of this is just, again, reflecting that shift of trust, beginning with a focus on students as learners rather than cheaters in waiting. And that can include things like welcoming and then honoring students' accommodations, for example, or having flexible due dates, student choice and assignment. These are all aspects of that build a practice of a culture of integrity, but also recognize EDI implications. Okay, I wanted to focus right now on thinking about, I'm going to turn this pointer off if I can do that. Ooh, I can. What roles faculty can play in, faculty and staff actually, in constituting a culture of integrity. There's lots of research that shows that peers' attitude to cheating are a major and sometimes the most compelling motivations for students to cheat or not. If everybody is doing it, then why wouldn't I? Eaton et al.'s research has also looked at cultures of help that might happen, particularly in like a cohort program or something where students work really closely together. And the sense is you're not being a good team player if you are not going along with the others. So those are some of the social dynamics that can be at work in a peer setting. But research has also shown the major role that faculty attitudes play and whether or not students take up our invitation to do their work with integrity. Julia Christensen Hughes, in a landmark study, pointed out that students cheat when they feel cheated. And some of this has to do with they can be discontent about what they see as instructors are recycling exams year after year or using test banks without modifying them in any kind of ways. And certainly we're all going to recognize that we do recycle materials because we've invested a lot of time in designing those materials, in part so that we can use them year after year. But an ideal setting is that we would be updating them. They would live again in the context of a course that we are teaching, not by rote, but for each group of students. But it's also beyond that in the research, the cheating when students cheat when they feel cheated, is they also will do that when they don't think the institution, or in particular their instructor, cares about whether or not they or anyone else is committing misconduct. Just another point on that, if they feel that everyone can get away with it, or that if they have reported it and it wasn't taken seriously, then what's the point? What's the point in doing your work with integrity? So one of the ways to run this off is, of course, for all of us as instructors, is to teach academic integrity in every single course. That returns to that myth of everyone already knows it, so I don't have to teach it, or everyone is getting this lesson somewhere else, high school, first year, library, so I don't have to be responsible for it. It does need to be renewed and relevant in each course. That allows for disciplinary and context-specific nuance. It addresses the changing degrees of complexity, and it affirms that as an institution and in our particular courses, we do care very much that our students meet academic integrity. expectations. This is a collective investment and it's not arbitrary. There is not going to be a difference in expectations across courses. Just to deal with these ideas in more detail, one of the impasses that we run into is when there is not consistency in articulating and upholding that expectation, it does begin to seem arbitrary. And there is a cost to non-compliance, and that cost, again, intersects with these concerns about equity, diversity, inclusion, who it affects, why it matters, how not knowing or following the rules can be exclusive and harmful. What's okay in one class has to be okay, or what's not okay, I think is probably the better way of putting it. What's not okay in one class needs to not be okay in another, unless there are disciplinary reasons for these kinds of things. So we can think about group work as a place that is really, really challenging for students and instructors around thinking about academic integrity. That's a place I've always talked about as needing to have a conversation led by you, but with solutions provided by students. How are we going to uphold academic integrity in the setting of a group project, for example? Making those kinds of things explicit, but also saying we are going to, that still applies here in a group project. If the system seems inconsistent, then it becomes unfair inherently. I will deal with misconduct cases, but another instructor won't. That seems unfair, and it also becomes divorced for any meaning. So some things that you want to think about in your own course in conversation with your department. What is the benchmark for a reportable case versus a teachable moment? That has to be consistent within practices. So let me turn to a little quiz I like to do. And it's not a real quiz. There's nothing fancy, like no poll. This is just some takeaway questions for you about being ready to take up that responsibility of providing consistent academic integrity experience. Do you know when to report a case of academic misconduct? Again, what's that benchmark? We're past the teachable moments. At what point? When do I need to report a case? You might also think about, do I know actually how to report a case of academic misconduct? And also, if I don't know those things, who do I ask? Who is the person in my department who can help me? Or if I'm not sure whether something should be reported or not, who can I ask? If you don't have a person in your department, like often that might be an associate head, for example, or your department head. You might have an academic integrity officer in your department, and that's not very common at UBC. It's really important to ask for one, or to ask who that person might be, because, and to ask now, to ask before your semester starts, so that you are prepared in advance. Why is this useful? One is that you need to know what you're looking for. You need to know what the process are so that you understand the expectations that you are expected, the expectations that the university has for instructors. It's also really helpful to have a better understanding of what the UBC policy and process looks like that is being updated. I think Ainsley Rouse is here, and so Ainsley knows very, very well that we are working as an institution on updating on that process, but find out what it means to report somebody, because a barrier for faculty in reporting is that they don't want to make unnecessary trouble for a student. Many students who are being reported for the first time only will receive a warning, but they are then flagged in the process, which is important for thinking about that coherence across the institution as actually better building a culture of integrity, because we are ideally pairing that with this educative approach. When, how, and who do I ask, and why should I do this? These are the things to make sure that you have the answers for in advance. The idea about of being able to pick up the phone or to write an email to someone to say, hey, I've got a weird situation, can I talk to you about it, is also important, because sometimes we run into things that make us really upset or really angry. I mean, there's an emotional quality to running into a misconduct situation, and sometimes you just need someone to talk through the possibilities with you, and you may need some coaching about how to handle this tough conversation in ways that are informed by proactive, educative, and EDI lenses as well. And I can talk more about that in the chat, and always with the caveat that you'd want to make sure you're doing it in the way that your department and your faculty are following. This is a personal responsibility, but it's certainly one that you are sharing with your department. Okay, just a couple more things in closing. One is to return to this idea about who knows and who does not know, but to expand that, to think about academic integrity in that broader umbrella of hidden curriculum, not just about the particulars of doing work with integrity and meeting the expectations of ethical research, but just how does the university work, and how do I as a student negotiate all of these expectations about what I call how to university. So for my own practice, I make these things about academic integrity, but I also tie those things explicitly into spelled out lessons in how the university works. And I do various versions of that for second, third, and fourth year. I think that's also useful for TAs and graduate students. Again, this is a UDL framework of assuming that we're inviting people in and giving them the knowledge they need to belong at this place. So normalizing questions about how to university and normalizing questions in general. We heard yesterday about the value of talking about related skills to academic integrity, about note-taking, time management, because many students end up in misconduct for reasons that are about, I had 40 tabs open and I forgot which tab I'd found it on, note-taking, so those kind of practices. Thinking about the hidden curriculum of how to navigate resources and supports for students in crisis, because many students end up in an academic misconduct setting because there's this dealing with extraordinarily challenging circumstances, don't know about help they can seek out, or don't feel that they are worthy of that help because they have that lack of belonging. So thinking about always, what are the barriers for students? What do we know? What do we not? Okay, how do I get this? What do we don't know that we don't know? What can our students help us find out that we have, we often have just a kind of internalized set of knowing how to work through the university, and we don't always pause to think about what might be hidden from them. Some questions for you to take away before we turn to our own question period is just thinking about, as you put this into practice in your own course, if you've come to this thinking you're getting ready to design your syllabus, you can have a look at your 13 weeks or 6 weeks if you're teaching a summer course, and think about the expectations around academic integrity that are implicit in how you do your own work in your discipline. Sociologists, for example, I had a conversation with the Department of Sociology about how they needed to build in thinking about academic integrity in relation to third year students beginning to do work with human subjects, for example. What are your expectations of a third, fourth, or graduate level student around ethical knowledge making, or first year? If you're in a program, Pete Ostevicic gave a terrific presentation yesterday thinking about engineers and how they think about academic integrity in relation to their professional commitments as engineers. Think about those and how to build in, to surface those expectations throughout the semester. This is also a moment as you're doing that kind of survey to really think about what are the places where we might not be explicit enough. In first year programs, one of the things we discovered through the Cheating Hearts program was that students were very confused when we kept asking them for original work. At the same time, we were asking them to conduct maps of the state of knowledge, to do literature reviews in their field, and to think about their knowledge, their original research as extending existing knowledge. To many students, those things were incompatible. And that was an opportunity for us to talk more explicitly about what original research means. What does research even mean? That can be important to clarify, particularly if you're working in a multidisciplinary setting where students bring different understandings of that term, as I've discovered in large classes that are for non-majors where science students and humanities students, for example, understand research differently. Thinking about, again, what might not be clear enough, do have a think about what forms of help are acceptable. So in yesterday's session on academic integrity, Brior Alvarez talked about translation software in the context of a language course. That's a great illustration of how Google Translate might be fine in, I don't know, a chemistry course. Maybe it's not, but it might be, because it's serving a different function there than it is for a student who is learning to work in a language that's new to them and needs to demonstrate their learning. We can also run into some kind of gray areas if we think about if you do a peer feedback session. I always do peer feedback, peer review sessions in my courses, and I make really clear the distinction between a session I've offered or that I encourage students to seek out feedback from classmates or from other readers. Feedback as distinct from editing, and which feedback is okay, but editing is not okay, and why. Many students work with tutors. Thomas Lancaster is an academic integrity researcher, talks about toxic tutors. We need to distinguish a toxic tutor, a tutor who might be providing editing or in fact maybe working for a contract cheating site. We need to distinguish that kind of tutoring from the kind of help students might find at a writing center or with working with a tutor with whom they can set those expectations. Help students understand what a homework help site like Chegg, Course Hero really is, and understanding those connections to contract cheating. And we have on the academic integrity at UBC website some language for you to help you understand yourself and to share with students about what contract cheating is. And as you're doing this course review, thinking about your assessment and course design, taking every opportunity to reward integrity. Susan Ben talks about how we need to have the, to set set the conditions for students to feel comfortable to ask questions about the rules for academic integrity without repercussions or negative reactions. That was one of the great joys of the Cheating Hearts projects that our faculty reported, was that they did have those conversations with students, that students did feel much more comfortable asking questions about academic integrity, and then it turned into asking questions about all kinds of things. So it really did change the conversation as we'd hoped. And so hoping that we have set up in a context here in which you feel comfortable asking questions yourself, I want to turn things to, so we have some, looks like 12 minutes for Q&A, and I see there's been a lot of activity in the chat. So I'm going to stop sharing and look at the chat and give you a chance here as I'm doing that to just think about if there's things that you wanted to add or questions that you might have for me. Okay, my goodness, a lot has happened here. Oh, Tamara's reminded me, yes, I started using AI. Yes, it's AI, not, although sometimes we have AI as artificial intelligence and AI as academic integrity intersecting. If we think about Proctorio, that's a bad intersection. Hamid's asked about if I agree or we'd agree collectively, capitalist society is grassroots that uses education system to produce obedient labor. Yeah, okay, so Hamid, I invite you to say more about this, but this is where I see a really productive set of conversations emerging around academic integrity, but also around grading practices, for example. Tomorrow there is a session on implementing alternative grading practices that might be a productive shared ground here for thinking about how we're reproducing students who aren't just good rule followers, but who are also, that we're not putting all of the effort into making sure that students are compliant rule followers, but they're thinking about the why piece. Why does it matter whether or not students do their work with integrity? That's really the piece that I think can move beyond rule compliance to thinking about these as the integral practices of knowledge making at the university, and then beyond to broader questions of sort of ethical citizenship, being an ethical community member in whatever professional, personal situations we are in. I think that's the opportunity we have to move beyond simple compliance or non-compliance. Tamara's pointed out students tell her that her exams weren't fair because the questions aren't searchable in Chegg. Yes, that is. Now that would be an interesting place to have a conversation about why they would assume that would be more fair. What are their expectations around assignments? I would love to hear more from students about that. Tamara's pointed out that those of us who are consistent in reporting cases are disadvantaged by the extra work. And in fact, that is something I'd forgotten to say. I got caught up in my own slides, is that there is an equity piece here too. And that is around faculty needing the support of the institution and the resources to deal with misconduct cases, but also to make the shift to an educator framework, because it does take time. There's labor. In the Cheating Hearts project, one of the things that we did as a group was we produced and shared plug and play resources, many of which we've made open access. They're in the link to our website is in the handout that Suki has shared. But the idea that we should not all individually needing to rethink these kinds of things. Maybe as a department, you as a collective could come up with department level test banks, for example. I know that's been a practice at the university since 2020. That's just an example, but we also really need to be supported in this effort, and that labor will fall. Let's acknowledge that labor will fall with more weight on faculty and staff members who are part of equity deserving groups and who are already doing additional kinds of labor and dealing with additional challenges to their authority. So let's acknowledge that piece and also think about how the institution could intervene in that way as well. Okay, I see there's 3 new messages, and I'm gonna, okay, Suki's put the handout back in the chat, and Suki's also put in the registration for the alternative grading session. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to work bottom down again. Oh, and I see that Tamara, you've got a hand up.
Laura, I just wanted to comment super quickly on the last comment you made about the burden or the onus of the extra work falling on maybe inequitably on certain members of our community. And I just want to add there that lecturers, sessionals, adjuncts are often and as I understand it, one of the largest body of those of us in the classroom who see these things, and we are already precarious employment. So definitely there is an equity piece. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, and thank you for acknowledging that.
Yeah, thank you, Tamara. That was one of the things that was a motivator for us in our project, was thinking about the members of the pilot group were all lecturers or tenure track or tenured faculty members, and thinking about how do we take that labor away? Not that we were thinking about ways to take the labor away without taking away autonomy and choice for our colleagues. And that's always a balancing act, but recognizing that we were in a unit where we did employ many contract faculty members, and not wanting them to have additional work on top of the fact that, yes, as you say, they have high teaching loads, high marking loads, and are in those face-to-face kinds of ways in a precarious kinds of position. I don't see any other hands. Laura has asked, the final exam policy is often misleading and misinterpreted. Oh, okay, maybe that's in response to something else. Oh, Kieran, you've asked a question. I see. Okay. How do my TAs know how to deal with academic misconduct if they come across in student work? Do they want to approach me about this? Yes, that is a huge question. And one that came up, Jackie Brinkman asked, how do we bring our TAs and grad students into this conversation about teaching for integrity, rewarding integrity? That is the missing piece, and something I think we need as an institution to be thinking about, because it will help them as graduate students, it will help them as students, as well as in their teaching roles. And I remember well my experiences as a graduate student as feeling like, how do I gain authority? And one of the ways I thought that I needed to be authoritative was to be like a super hard ass about things, and catch cheaters in these ways, which I did. In fact, actually had 3 cases of misconduct. And the first year I was a TA in another institution. But if I'd had it would have been very helpful to have had some training around that. And that's something we could be thinking about as an institution. Oh, Jackie says teaching for integrity would be a great workshop. Awesome. Okay, let's do that. We've got lots of people who would be willing to be facilitators, I'm sure. Jackie says, how do you balance being able to ask about a specific situation, the need to report academic misconduct? If you discovered an incident through the question and a need to report? Jackie, do you want to say a little bit more about that? I'm not sure if I understood.
Yeah, so, it's that balancing. So sometimes we've had a situation, where a student approached us in a scholarly integrity course and said, I didn't know that, I wasn't sure that this wasn't right, but now that I've attended this course, I know this isn't right. And so then it did move forward as a case, but the student couldn't be protected because they were implicated in the situation. So it was just a fine balance, right? So with a student and there's uncertainty, that sometimes that uncertainty could actually be part of a misconduct, like unintentional cheating, like you say. And so it's this balance between being supportive and yet also this duty to report. And so I don't know if you've ever been in a situation like that and how you balance that. I mean, Shirley might be able to speak to that, because sometimes with the Ombuds office, so it's for some students, they're nervous about approaching because they don't want to be a whistleblower, or I guess this comes around whistleblower protection, really, is my question.
Shirley, did you want, Shirley, I think you were still here. Do you have a perspective on that? Shirley is the ombuds person for the university.
Yeah, she's not here anymore.
Yeah, I can
she is.
pipe in a little bit, Jackie. I think that's a great question. And for those reasons, I guess the Ombuds office is a bit of a unique unit on campus in that we are not an office of report or record. So we would encourage students to come to our office, talk about these things, explore the issues. And, we do encourage students to be honest and forthright. If they've made a mistake, to go forward, acknowledge them, work with their instructors, and move in a way that will enhance their academic progress, even if they have made a mistake. So, Jackie, I'm not sure if that answers your question. I think that's a really complex issue and puts people in a lot of difficult ethical situations as well. Laurie, I don't know if you can answer that as well in terms of from the instructor point of view.
Well, I'm just going to add, like, I just think that part of it is that, as you know, maybe that's the build in of the educative approach, is having that, building in ways to ask questions, and then, asking early on as preventative ways. So building that, culture of trust.
And also helping them know who they can ask. I mean, that's one thing I'd like to see more, and I've talked about it with members of the Academic Integrity Working Group, is more peer-to-peer support around this, because you may not want to go to your instructor and say, I did this thing, or I'm about to do this thing that I think probably might be, I don't know if this violates academic integrity or not. I think you would probably feel more comfortable chatting about that with peers who I think you might feel less judgment from, as long as they were peers, like not some random person on Reddit, but a person who has gone through some training with us through UBC, through the Scholarly Integrity Office, for example. But having a range of answer people or sounding boards, consultants, for students who include us, absolutely, because we have set the tone and said, yes, come ask us, no stupid questions. Let's have a chat before there's a problem. And there is somebody at 4 a.m. who is the ask away equivalent, that they could log on and say, hey, would this be cheating? Would this be misconduct? I think that will be a super helpful way to provide wraparound support for students. I do see that it is 12:03 and I've held you on past the hour. I'm happy to stay on and answer questions. And I know there will be questions and comments that I've missed in the chat, but I think I will close this formally and we can stop the recording. But I wanted to thank everyone so much for coming